All right, let's get into the plot. The plot. Well, this is one big topic we're going to try and take on. And it's one of those topics that you can really dig deep into. So what I'm going to do is just skim the top level and leave you with some theories and guidelines that you can study and research further if you want to. Again, different methods are going to work for different writers. So let's get into it. It'll be big, so just sit tight. So what is the plot? Basically, it's the story you're telling. It's the sequence of events that make up your story. It's what you would say when someone asks, "What's your story about?" Well, unless you answer with that well-used joke, "Well, it's about 300 pages." So plot is important. So a quick question, how do we make sure we have a good plot? Well, the answer is easy. We just want problems, 99 problems. You might think the best thing in life is to be rich, live a problem-free life, be surrounded by wonderful people with conflict-free relationships. And that's probably true for real life. But on the page life, we want problems, we want conflicts, challenges, maybe a happy ending, maybe. For example, if Harry Potter had loving wizarding parents that were still alive and Voldemort was not out to kill him, his life would be nice. But it wouldn't really make a good story. Or if Katniss had not cared for her little sister's safety, she wouldn't have volunteered for the Hunger Games. Or even in nonfiction, if Cheryl Strayed had not cheated on her husband and lost her mother and suffered from depression, she wouldn't have walked the Pacific Coast Trail and given us that great story in the wild. So having an obstacle and the action to overcome that obstacle is the heart of all plots. Well, let's try and come up with some more examples, just so we get a good idea what plot is. So take a moment and think about what you're currently reading. What's the main obstacle that the character's trying to overcome? If you're reading something like an epic fantasy, it's probably a dark lord trying to take over the world, and some small magical guy is using a ring to try and overcome this. Another simple one would be like a murder mystery. The obstacle is the detectives trying to find the murderer. But you might be reading a book about overcoming social issues or gender issues, someone overcoming poverty and the problems that come along with that, or a woman trying to find her place in society when it's very misogynistic, or just a romantic tale. You have somebody who they should be together and the obstacle is something's in the way. One of them has commitment issues or a family problem, and they have to overcome that. There's lots and lots of different plots out there. But the main idea here is just that there's a problem and the characters are trying to overcome this problem. That's essentially what makes a good plot. So there are lots of different ways of looking at plot and story structure. One of them that I really like is by Brandon Sanderson. It's his promise, progress, and payoff theory. So if you look at it, the promise is you give the reader a promise at the beginning of a book. So it's important to get this right. You want to give the reader an idea of what they're getting into. The plot, the characters, the tone, even maybe how it might end. And if you keep this promise, your reader will finish your story and feel satisfied at the end. If you don't keep your promise, the reader will be confused, annoyed, and might even put the book down. So a common and easy way to start a story is by meeting the characters mid-scene in a microcosm of the adventure you're going to tell us. And it's usually some sort of action scene. A good example is the beginning of Star Wars. The story starts with the mighty Empire ship, this big huge thing, attacking this small rebel ship. There's a bit of a mysterious story about Luke being the only hope, and there's a couple of funny droids in there. So this just gives a promise of action and a fight for the galaxy, a kind of a David versus Goliath type story. It's just a much better start. than if we had moved ahead a little bit and Luke Skywalker was on his uncle's moisture farm, which is kind of the boring part. Another example is Agatha Christie's book, A Murder is Announced. It starts with a promise right off the bat. There's a notice in the personal section of the newspaper advertising a murder at a certain house at 6 p.m. So the curious neighbors reading this paper, they make plans to just kind of walk by the house at around that time. They want to know why is there going to be a murder? Is this real? It kind of sets the tone of, well, there's obviously a murder, and there's a gossipy group of neighbors, and it just sets the whole story up. These are just a couple of examples of how some writers added a hint to the plot right from the get-go. And you can do that in your story too. Just show the problem right away. Add the main character, like the main obstacle that's preventing your character from getting what they want or what they need, and just kind of give an indication of where the development could go. So what do we mean by a tone promise? So your introductory should be setting the tone or style of the story that you're going to be telling. If you're going to be writing it like a serious psychological thriller, you don't want to start with a wacky, pun-filled introduction. And if you're attempting a romance story involving aliens, maybe work that into the introduction somehow. You should let the reader know what kind of story they're getting into, right? And all of this promising work, it could all be in the first paragraph, the first scene, the first chapter, but you could even stretch it out a little bit and have it in your first few chapters of your book. It all just depends on your own style, your personal feel and instinct. Just keep your promise throughout the book. This is probably kind of a natural and instinctive thing, but make sure you keep the same tone and remember what you promised at the beginning and try and follow through with that. The second part is the progress. So when you're reading, you need to feel a sense of progress through the book. You need to indicate to your reader that progress is happening, hopefully towards something that they want to see, but they need to feel like the book's moving along and it's not a long slog that's going nowhere. That's not fun to read. There's a few kind of tips you can use to kind of help this along. Visually, you can use a map. It shows the reader where you're going, how far you've progressed. So this is not going to work in every kind of story. There are other ways you can try to make just give a feeling of progress. There's Sanderson's idea is also if you put mini promise, progress, and payoffs in a chapter or a scene, your reader will feel like you're moving along. You can reduce this down to every conversation, battle, romantic encounter, if you want. An example of this would be like a chapter in a murder mystery book. So let's say a detective starts with a theory about an alibi and a suspect, and he questions the maid, finds out the alibi is false. He has a clue. He can move on to the next person he wants to interview or try and find the next clue, but he's made some progress, right? So you have the promise is to solve the mystery, and the progress is finding clues, and the payoff is he uncovers a clue or a piece of evidence. You don't need to rely solely on plot for a feeling of progress. Character development is also essential to give a feeling of progress. We'll cover that more in the characters section. But some plot archetypes just lend well to progress. Like I mentioned, the murder mystery, but also like a heist is another structure where you're just full of progress towards the goal of the big heist at the end. Like to steal the world's biggest diamond or something like that. So you can kind of think about it like you have so many problems along the way, like the heist for example, they want to steal the richest diamond, but there's all these security measures in the way, so they have to get through each one until they get to the big diamond at the end. So as you're working your way through these security measures and problems, it feels like you're progressing towards the end. As your character takes on each problem, simple progression, reader feels like you're progressing and therefore feels more satisfied when they're reading. A good example of this is if you've read the Da Vinci Code by Dan Brown. This one feels like it's constantly progressing really quick. And why? Because the characters are kind of figuring out, the story is a feeling like of short puzzles. The characters face a little puzzle, they work at solving it, and then it leads them to the next puzzle where they have to solve that, and they start the progress all over again, and they're constantly moving towards the goal of the final puzzle. I think it also helps that they're traveling around the world to take on the next puzzle, so there's like a kind of a literal sense of motion there too. Now we'll move on to Payoff now. So I have a quick joke for you. Why did the reader keep turning the pages? To see if you keep your promises. You just need to make sure that all of your plot lines are resolved by the end here. Kind of like programming code. You can think of it, there's the, let's see here, the big plot line, and then you have lots of little ones in between. They all need to be solved, and the big one be solved at the end. I'm sure you read a book where a plot line has not been resolved, and you close the book and you just have this kind of feeling of there's something missing. For example, the payoff for the classic murder mystery is that final scene where the detective reveals all the clues and who the killer is, right? And I've had the experience of reading a murder mystery and having the promise not match the payoff. The mystery just wasn't solved. And I was kind of cheesed off. So mad, in fact, that I gave the book a 1-star review. Yeah. Let me just read you the comments I wrote. It was The Colorado King by The Colorado Kid by Stephen King. And I love Stephen King books. But this one, no, not okay. So here's my review. You'll either love this book or hate it. It is a murder mystery. A man found dead on the beach, thousands of miles away from his home. He appeared to have a nice life, a family, a job he liked. His death is very suspicious. He choked on a piece of steak. He is lacking things like his ID, a wallet, a coat, yet he had a pack of cigarettes and he's a non-smoker. A bundle of small inconsistencies make this case interesting. The kicker? The story ends without the mystery being solved. Is this a groundbreaking idea by King? Kind of like a choose-your-own-adventure, but this time choose-your-own-solution. I say no, not for me. It was really annoying. So I have that experience where there was a promise that I was expecting, there was progress, there was all these clues of how this guy died, and the payoff was just not there. And it left me feeling like this was a bad book. I was kind of mad. So when you get to the payoff, make sure you have a payoff. And if you want to upsize your payoff, you could add unexpected payoffs. One tip I've heard is that you shouldn't give the exact payoff that you promised, but you should give something else. Either a bigger payoff or a substitute of some sort. So promise one thing at the beginning and then make something else more appealing and give it to them at the end. Another plot system I really liked was the 7-point system. It's by a fellow named Dan Wells. It's just a great way to hit all these points that make a story kind of just a general outline, easy to write, I find. So let's take a look over here at the 7 points. First, we got the hook. So this is the the start of the book, right? It's where, and how do you figure out where to start in your story? One simple trick is to start at the opposite state of the ending. What I mean is if your character ends strong and powerful, maybe they should start out weak, and it's a simple way to just create a character arc right from the start. Second point there is plot turn 1. So this is where you move from the beginning to the midpoint, where you introduce the conflict, the character's world changes a bit somehow. Maybe they meet new people or discover a secret, or be exposed to new ideas. And it can kind of spur the character into change or action. The pinch point is where you apply some pressure. Something goes wrong, the bad guys attack. It forces the character into action. This is often where you would introduce your villain if you had a villain. The midpoint. This is where the character begins moving from the beginning state where they weren't really sure what they were doing or wanted to be involved in whatever the problem was. But now the midpoint is where they move from more of a reaction type thing to action. They want to solve the problem. They want to be involved. They're motivated at that point. Pinch 2. This is where you apply even more pressure until the situation feels almost hopeless. This is where the first plan they had fails, or their mentor dies, or the bad guys come up with a surprise secret weapon that looks undefeatable. Your sports team loses the qualifying match. Something like that. And the more hopeless the situation, the bigger the payoff's going to be at the end. So if you can make it feel really hopeless, this is a good point to do it. Plot turn 2 is where the character figures out how to get over this, what they want to do, and then in the resolution they do it. So plot turn 2 is where the character obtains that final thing they need, or they learn a lesson about themselves or overcome whatever conflict they had internally to kind of take on the problem and make it happen. And in the resolution it's just the end where they solve the problem. So I'm just going to quickly go through an example so we can get a better idea what all these things mean. I'm going to look at Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. It's the first book there. So the hook, the tip was to put your character in the opposite state of what they're going to be at the end. So at the end of this book, Harry knows a little bit of magic. He defeats Voldemort for the first time. And in the beginning, the opposite of that is he doesn't know anything about magic. He's an orphan living in a closet, and everyone around him, his relatives, are not very nice to him. So we can see there's going to be a character arc from there. Plot turn 1. This is where you introduce some conflict or spur some action or something. This is when Harry gets the letters, he ends up going to wizarding school, and he starts learning magic. The pinch point 1 is kind of the first time we have some real pressure or something goes wrong. I'm going to go with the Halloween night when the troll comes into the castle and attacks and finds Hermione in the bathroom alone, and Hermione, Harry, and Ron all have to fight this troll without any outside help, without their wizarding teachers to help them. So it's kind of the first time they've been really exposed to some real danger there. This leads into the midpoint. So this is where the character starts moving towards their end state. Okay, so this is when Harry learns about the Sorcerer's Stone, that it's being held at Hogwarts, and he's going to stop Voldemort from getting it. This is when he moves from reaction to action. He wants to solve this problem. Pinch 2 is where you apply more pressure, and this seems almost hopeless. So this is when they know Voldemort, or they think it's Snape, is going to go and steal the stone, and it's up to them to stop him. So they go through the dungeon. Ron and Hermione fall into some traps, and Harry's left all alone to fight Voldemort. It feels almost hopeless. Then we get to the plot turn 2. So this is when the character gets that final piece of whatever they need to overcome the problem. So this is when Harry looks in the mirror and realizes, oh, I have the stone in my pocket. And that leads to the resolution where he defeats Voldemort. So when you're using a method system like this, you can, I'm going to give you a couple of tips that I have. One is at the beginning. Often at the beginning of your story, your character's in a weak state, they're living a boring life. It might not be the best place to start. So you can use kind of a prologue. It lets you start out with something cool, hint at all the cool stuff to come. I gave the example of Star Wars. Another example is the Jurassic Park novel by Michael Crichton. It has an excellent prologue using the perspective of a character that doesn't even appear in the story, right? It's a visiting doctor in a remote village in South America, and he finds himself helping this badly injured man, and he's told the man was hurt in a construction accident, but the wounds are like rips and tears from an animal, like a huge animal of some sort. And the locals seemed really spooked by this, and the injured man's dying words are raptor, raptor, but they're in another language. And so it just gives a promise of what's to come, what disasters to come, right? So another tip you can use is in these pinch points. When there's some pressure applied and they're trying to figure out things, you can use a try-fail cycle. So before the hero actually succeeds in anything important, they should try and fail a couple of times. It just makes it more satisfying, I guess. Like for example, in Pinch Point 2 in the Harry Potter, they were trying to get into the underground chamber and stop Voldemort, and there's a series of obstacles in the way, and it's a kind of a series of try-fails where they eventually overcome them. So you had like the Devil's Snare that they tried to squirm out of, but it turns out you have to just relax and let you go. And it's just a unique kind of try and fail. At each obstacle, you know, 2 of the 3 characters are going to fail, but one character had the skills or the knowledge to overcome the problem. Like the flying keys, Harry could, you know, ride his broom really quickly and get the flying key, or the wizarding chess, the life-size wizarding chess, Ron was great at playing wizard chess. And the potions section, Hermione was really good at potions. So they each had their own kind of skill that let them get through. So very similar to Dan Wells' 7-point system is a plot structure called the beat sheet. It was originally aimed at film screenwriters, but it works great for any creative writing. The beat sheet's just another way of outlining and building a framework for your story. The goal is to have all the beats at the right time to make it feel, I guess, kind of like there's promise, progress, and payoff, right? They're all kind of intertwined here. So the beat sheet is by a guy named Blake Snyder. He wrote a book called Save the Cat. If you want to look into that, it will give you way more detail than I'm going through here. I'm just going to kind of provide a handout that goes deeper into each of those beats. But this is just another example of kind of a structure you can use to set up your story. So a quick summary of how to use the beat sheet. Act 1, you introduce the protagonist, you hook the reader, and you set up the story. You have an inciting incident that launches the character into their first dilemma. Then you have the end of the beginning. So what kind of forces are out there making the characters choose different paths they're gonna take? That's when you head into Act 2. So that's when the protagonist reacts to the new goal they have, or stakes or obstacles that are in their way. But they have some setbacks. You have like a pinch point there where you add more conflict, kind of like the beat sheet. Kind of like the 7-point plot structure from before. You have the midpoint in this one. You can just reinforce the story's goals and stakes at that point. Then there's another pinch point where more conflict's added. There's a crisis. This is where you get to that point where the character is almost hopeless. And then in Act 3, you have the climax. The protagonist summons up the courage to overcome their inner obstacle or conquer whatever force is coming at them. And then the resolution just, shows the characters as they've changed in the end. So it's very similar to the 7-point section or the 7-point structure, but just another way of looking at it. And all these story structures are based on what we call a 3-act structure. What the heck is that? It's, I'm going to break it way down here. Simply Act 1, you kind of show the problem. Act 2 is where the action and conflict come to a peak, and Act 3 is where there's the climax and you come to a quick conclusion. It's just a very standard kind of storyline. And again, I'll provide a handout that goes a bit deeper into each little point there. But it's another thing that you can read up on your own. Just become familiar with it. Or if you want, you can study much deeper into this stuff. And if this kind of setup works well for you, just use it, go with it. And it's not going to work for every writer, but it'll work for some of them, so give it a try. Now, how do you plot your story? I'm going to share a few tips with you. One of them is start at the end. What do we mean by that? A lot of writers say it's key to know how your story ends before you start the book. You just need to know character A gets together with character B, or Harry defeats Voldemort, or the janitor was the ghost and he would have got away with it if it hadn't been for those meddling kids and that dog too. So if you know the end of your story, you can plot the progress. You can go from the end and back to, you can choose a starting point, figure out what your character needs to do to get to the goal, and then add a big ending. Simple as that, right? So let's pull an example here. So let's say you have a story where there's a wedding planner who just can't seem to get married. So in the end she's going to get married. So you need to find a starting point. Maybe you need to be at a point where they're missing what they need. They don't have a boyfriend or anything like that. What they need to do is meet another character who is also missing a life partner. Then they have to have some sort of conflict. Then you need some scenes where they complement each other's flaws and realize that they're right for each other. And then you have the climax where there's some misunderstanding or something like that, and the wedding's called off, and then at the last minute they realize it's all just a big misunderstanding. They get together and have a wonderful wedding and live happily ever after, right? Okay. You might want to organize all of your milestones too, your progress points, your actions, all the things your characters need to go through, and just write them all down. Then you can plot your progress. And so you could take a plot point A, mix it up with a character A, a plot point B, mix it up with character B, go through all of your goals and plot points you want to get to. If you have them written down, it's just easier to kind of keep track of them, especially if you have a lot of characters or a few plot points or plot stories or whatever that you want to get into the story. A lot of writers find this more efficient, make their writing work better. It's great for keeping track, like I said, of multiple plot lines, or if you have a lot of characters and you want them to each do something, write it all down, take different points. Every chapter, make sure you get something in there. For discovery writers, pantsers as we call them, if you're someone that doesn't like to write out a big plot, and you just want to write, You still need to know about plot lines and how they typically work. So after you're done writing your first draft, you'll want to look back and make sure that your story hits all the things it needs to hit. A lot of hitting going on. And you could also try this yes, but, and no, and kind of system. So you take a character, throw them into a terrible situation, then have them do something. Then you ask, did it work? If yes, add a but. Make something else go wrong. So they tried something, did it work? Yeah, but not quite work, or something else, it caused something else to happen. Or you can say no and. So they try something, did it work? No, and it made the situation worse. So you do that a few times, and it kind of just makes more tension, makes more conflict. It's a good way to just write, to get something down. An example of this is, well, I'll go back to Star Wars. So they had just, that scene where they had just rescued Princess Leia. They're surrounded by stormtroopers. It looks like they're going to get captured, but they escape. They go through this, whatever, the little chute there into the garbage. So did it work? Yes, but now they're in a garbage chute. They're stuck in there. So they try and escape. So they try and open the door. And does that work? No. So they try shooting the door open. Does that work? No. And the shots fire all over the place and almost kill them. So then R2-D2 tries to hack into the door. And does that work? Yes. But it takes a few minutes, and it also starts the compactor to squish them. So they try and hold the compactor walls back, and does that work? No. And turns out there's a monster in the garbage that wakes up or whatever from this. So you see there's a lot of yes, buts, and ands, no, which really escalates that scene. So when they finally do escape, it kind of makes it a little more satisfying. Plot lines. That's most stories can be boiled down to a general plot line. And if you're really interested in researching plots, if you do a web search, you'll probably run across these ideas like the 7 best plots, or there are only 5 true plot lines. Things like overcoming the monster, or rags to riches, rebirth, the hero's journey, all these kind of things. So the true number of plots, whatever that is up for debate. What is true is that there are only so many general plots. You can boil a story down to something, and every one of them's been done to death. So what that means is your stories, you will not be coming up with something that is unique, that hasn't been done before in a general sense. No matter how wacky and far out your ideas are. It can probably be boiled down to one of these general plots that have been done for eons, which is fine. Don't fret. Your ideas are still valid. So it might not be possible to come up with a brand new plot in the general sense, but you can do something that's unique and feels fresh. For example, fantasy quest stories. They're always full of old and white wizards, right? So you could just change up the genders or something. Or a rags to riches story would involve something modern like cryptocurrency or Bitcoin, something like that. Or a cozy mystery where the killer is the butler, but the butler is a robot. So you can come up with something fresh and unique like that. You can also mix and match. That works well. Mix and match genres to come up with something slightly different. A good example is the underdog story. Usually you'd think of some sports thing like Rocky or the Mighty Ducks. But if you took an underdog story and plotted it in a sci-fi genre, you'd come up with this great book. It's called Ender's Game. I don't know if you read it. It's by Orson Scott Card. It's really good. In that book, us humans are these underdog, ragtag, loser bunch of beings that are being attacked by this overwhelming alien force. We take a ragtag group of kids and they all come together and overcome the odds, and they save the galaxy and humankind. So it's just an underdog story, but it's not the typical sports kind of thing. You can also do a this meets this kind of idea. You've probably heard books or movies described that way. Maybe you like stories about superheroes, or you have a story about a superhero who drives pimped out vehicles, and you might describe it as X-Men meets Fast and Furious. You can take this idea and generalize it a bit and come up with ideas for stories, ways to describe your story. Say, ghost story meets romance, something like that. It gives it a familiar yet unique feel at the same time, right? But really, in the end, it's going to be your characters and setting and the way you tell your story that makes it different, that makes it unique. Now, why am I talking about chefs if we're doing a writing course? Because that's what we do. We use metaphors in writing. So what's the difference between a chef and a cook? Well, a cook, they can make a dish, but a chef can see what it's made of and why it works, and then tweak it to make it their own unique dish. You see the metaphor there? As a writer, you can work on your plot building skills by boiling down your favorite stories to see what they're made of and why they work, and then tweak them to make your own unique stories. So this is kind of why it's important to know a little bit or as much as you can about plot structure. So I'm going to maybe try and do some examples, come down with a few archetype plots, a hero's journey in a Cinderella type story, and see how if you have different settings and genres and characters, it just feels completely different. So the hero's journey, this is where there's a character in a boring life on some backwoods country farm or planet or something, and they get involved in a big galaxy-wide problem, and there's a mentor that takes them on a quest, and they have some adversity. They end up overcoming this, coming home as a changed person. It's kind of the circle of the hero's journey. So you can see it as Star Wars as a classic. You have Luke Skywalker, who's leading a boring life on his uncle's moisture farm on this deserted backwoods kind of planet. Then he gets caught up in this mentor figure, draws him on a quest. Obi-Wan Kenobi, you're my only hope, takes him and shows him the way of the Jedi. He has some adversity, takes on Darth Vader and the Empire, ends up defeating the Death Star using his force, and then he eventually comes home as a different person. He's now a Jedi who feels responsible for the galaxy. If we look at it from a different kind of point of view, like the hero's journey as a law thriller. So this is kind of like John Grisham books. You could kind of say this is them. A few of them. You have an up-and-coming lawyer who's usually from some small southern state, just barely making it as a lawyer. Then some mentor figure will come along, maybe a retired lawyer who knows about some money laundering or corruption, or a journalist who knows about something. So the young lawyer will get caught up in this, have some adversity, taking on these well-funded established law firms, being threatened, and maybe be mixed up with the mob or something like that. And then by the end, they come home as a different kind of lawyer. They're not this small-thinking, small-town lawyer. Now they're a confident, take on the big guy kind of lawyer now. There's another idea of a plot line in the Cinderella story. So you have your character who's obviously out of place and being persecuted. So you have Cinderella, right? She's should be like the queen or princess or whatever, but she's now the maid of the house, stuck in a small room on the top of the attic. She has an unexpected intervention with the fairy godmother. Comes and grants her whatever wish to go to the ball. She proves herself, shows how noble and beautiful she is to the prince, and in the end she comes home and is a changed person. She's now, like, the prince finds her, she then becomes a princess and rules over those who persecuted her. So if we look at the Cinderella story, it's through the lens of Harry Potter, very similar. We have a character who's out of place. Harry Potter is living in his uncle and aunt's closet under their staircase. He doesn't know he's this world-renowned wizard from a wizarding family who Voldemort's out to kill, and he's really famous. He doesn't know all this. And then he has an unexpected intervention. The letters come. Not Gandalf. That's Lord of the Rings. Dumbledore comes, and they take him to Hogwarts. He has some adversity, proves himself, beats Voldemort, and when he comes home that summer, he's a different person. He is a wizard. He's a confident wizard who doesn't take crap anymore. He doesn't have to sleep in the closet under the stairs, and his cousin who is always bullying him is now scared of him. So you see how these kind of plot lines, you can boil down a story to a different kind of plot line. But Cinderella and Harry Potter feel completely different, but they're very similar plot lines in the end. So like I said, you can go through these, dig as deep as you want. It's good to just know kind of what's going on with plot lines. And like I said, if you want to be a chef, you gotta learn all about the ingredients. Great metaphor.